Okay, we did gene flow, right? But we didn't do species. Okay. Is that true, or am I lying? Go, it's 9:30. There, a little spotlight on you guys. Test, test, test. Oh, it's working. Who has questions? No? Comments? Concerns? Yes, sir. Ask me right after class. Okay, because since it's random, everybody gets a different one. But yeah. No questions? Everybody's good? Really? Okay, so we left off on whatever day that was, Thursday, talking about fossils. We're going to finish up this lecture and do a little top hat action. And then, woo, yes. And then start on the next lecture. So the last stuff that we were talking about is just sort of what I think we already know. If you look at this kind of family tree, so to speak, it's giving you the evolutionary history of the horse. Okay, and this is right from our book. And it shows us the timeline is millions of years ago, right? So down here at the bottom would be 55 million years ago. And at the top is present time, what's currently living, right? So anytime you see a family tree, the only living species on that tree are the ones that are up there at present time, right? So if the branch only goes to here, right, that guy, that means that species died out over 40 million years ago, okay? So that's how you read the sort of family tree. And so they're showing you relationships amongst these different species, right? The ones that are more closely branched next to each other are more closely related, right? And the age and when these went extinct, okay? And so if you're digging through rock, right, or a bunch of soil, the deeper you go is generally the older sediments. Right? Sediments are settled down over years and years and years and years. And sometimes, right, we can see those layers of rock in a mountain because mountains are generally formed either by volcanoes or by earthquakes. Right? So if you go over to the Santa Monica Mountains, right, just drive your butt down Reseda all the way to the end south. Right? There's a little park up there, Mulholland Park. And you can get out and hike around. You can see that the sides of the hills that are eroded are layers of sediment, okay? Those mountains were once at sea level, and they've been pushed up by earthquakes. So you can see layers of rock. The ones at the bottom are the oldest. And you can find fossils in there also, okay? Mostly fossils of shells and fish scales, because that was all once underwater. So the deeper you go, the older the fossils are, right, in time. And so you can create this fossil history of different species, right, and how they changed over time, right? And somewhere down here was their common ancestor, right? And the rest of the tree of life, you know, goes way down here till the non-recent common ancestor, the ancestor from 3.5 billion years ago, right, that we all evolved from. Okay, so, right, usually they can look at how do they know how old all these fossils are? They can use different laboratory techniques to determine carbon dating, I think you guys have heard about, right? They're just looking at the decay of minerals and other elements over time. Okay, and so we know how long it takes one molecule of all the different elements on the stupid periodic table to decay, and then you can look at the relative amounts of each based on how old we think the Earth is. right, to figure out approximate ages of different stuff. So they can look at the fossils and determine, based on what the rocks around them or the minerals, right, if it's a bone that was mineralized, how old those actual minerals are now, right, to get a pretty good idea of how old stuff is. And then any other information about species or evolution would be where they live on the Earth. Okay, they call that either geographic or genealogic species, right? If they're not available to do the biological species test, right? Or they just won't have sex with even their own species in captivity, so you can't do are they the same species sex test, right? You can look at where they exist on Earth in relation to how we are pretty sure the land masses used to be, right? 4 million years ago, it was all one big land mass, and then the continents have been drifting and drifting and drifting. So Antarctica used to be attached to Australia and South America and Africa, and so they can look at where species go based on what they look like and how they think they might be related, right? So penguins exist in Antarctica and down here in the southern tips of all these other continents where at one point they used to all be attached, okay? Whereas polar bears are only found up north where all of those were attached, but never down in Antarctica. And penguins, even though like all the Christmas shows show penguins up at the North Pole, there aren't any penguins up there, okay? So don't believe those. The year that Santa Claus, what did he do? The year without a Santa Claus? Yeah. But the heat miser is real, so. And he does live up there at the North Pole. Okay, so this is just a little chart from one of the other books describing all the 3 main species concepts. Obviously, biological is the best one to use if you can, right? And if you can't do that test because they're extinct or they just won't cooperate, then we use these other methods to determine whether 2 different populations are actually the same species. Okay, and so that's just some info for you guys. Oh my goodness, what is going on here?
Who are these people? The shouting is a temporary side effect of the unfreezing process.
Yes, I'm having difficulty controlling the volume of my voice!
Okay. I don't know who has trouble controlling the volume of their voice around here. Okay, so let's do a little top hat. Yay! And let's magnify. All right. Remember, if you want your points to go to the grade book for extra credit in the class, you have to register at the Top Hat site and fork over 20 bucks. Sorry. Tried to get them to give it to us free, but they were having none of it. So it turns out they're trying to run a business, so they got to make some money. All right, so choose the incorrect statement. Always watch out for these on quizzes and exams. Incorrect. Sometimes I have to say over and over in my head, what's not true? Is this not true, not true, not true? Right? You're looking for the not true. Right? Our brains like to look for things that are true. Right? That's just human nature. That would be, and so we don't want to get sucked into picking a statement that is true when you're looking for one that's not. Right? So if the question says incorrect statement or all of these are true except, you're looking for the one that's total BS. Okay? Not true. Okay? So what is not true? And remember, if your texts are not going through, hop out of your seat and run outside or hold your phone out the door, and they'll usually go through then. And if you just feel like getting up, pretend like your phone's not working and hop up and go outside. you're falling asleep, you need to, oh my God, speaking of falling asleep. Hello? Oh, yes. Are we done? Did you text? Did you send it? No, yes, maybe so. Thumbs up. All right. Shutting her down. Kind of. You know how that goes. All right, what is not true? A, right? Members of the same species do not have sex with another species. That's the whole deal. Woohoo! You guys are the best things ever. Okay. Are they changing? Members of the same species do have sex with each other. That's part of the definition of being the same species. Members of the same species do have fertile offspring with each other. That's the other part of that equation. And then, yes, members of the same species have viable offspring, which is alive. Okay? Right? So remember when we talked about the mule or the hybrids, right? A horse and a donkey, they are separate species, but they will have sex if you play the right music. They will have live offspring usually. It's called a mule. That mule has an odd number of chromosomes, so it is not fertile. It cannot make eggs or sperm, usually. Okay? Very rarely, some of the female mules can go through ovulation, but it's very rare. Okay? All right, that is enough of that. Yes? No. How do I make it go away? Oh, I have to demagnify. Demagnify. And close the eyeball. All right. Put that back to sleep. Okay, now we're going to watch a little video, because you know how I am. It's going to be very educational and riveting, so get ready. Hold on to your seat.
In 1983, the island of Daphne Major experienced a prolonged wet season due to the most extreme El Niño of the century. Large ground finches had frequently flown to Daphne from neighboring islands, but had never managed to breed. In 1983, however, 5 of 13 finches stayed to breed. Martha and Peter Grant, who have been studying the finches of Daphne since 1973, believe that the long wet season created conditions that were favorable to breeding. The Grants were able to band and track this population as it slowly grew to 100 individuals over the next 15 years. Their studies show that significant differences in morphology and song now distinguish the large ground finch on Daphne from those on other islands. The beak size of large ground finches on Daphne has increased over time, and the call of the male finch has changed as well. It is possible that the Grants are documenting the evolution of an entirely new species of finch.
Holy crap. Can't believe it. All right. Questions? You guys are awfully quiet this morning. Ah! Oh, maybe we won't get to it today. Okay, so secret word of the day is going to be kinky. Yeah, start yelling already. That's all we have. Okay, so we're going to continue to talk about natural selection, evolution, right? Our favorite thing ever. Remember that natural selection acts on an individual, right? Or it's the individual that has an adaptation that allows it to survive and reproduce better than the average, right? If you don't have an adaptation that allows you to survive and reproduce, you're dead, and you're not passing on your DNA to the next generation, so your traits will not be passed on into the future, right? So the traits that allow the best survival and reproduction, or at least acceptable survival and reproduction, are the ones that permeate through the population because the rest are dead, okay? The population characteristics change over time. The frequency of the traits changes, right? If evolution is happening. If environment doesn't change and there's tons of food available, it's unlikely that you will get much change over time. Because everybody's getting food, even if they stink at getting food. They're getting hit on the head with the fruit. You know, they have to be really, really bad at getting food to not get enough to survive and reproduce. Okay? So it's only when there's some sort of competition or environmental change or food is scarce or there's something that allows only the better ones to survive and reproduce. Right? Otherwise, everybody's just passing their DNA and the genetic variation stays much higher, and nobody's really any better at anything. Or the ones that happen to really get lots of food and really reproduce, they only have a few more offspring than the other guys, because everybody's doing fine. Okay? As it turns out, natural selection is not the only process that can drive evolution. It's one of the main processes, and it usually is an umbrella over some of the other ones. But there are other things that can happen, and that do happen out in nature that have been documented, that affect evolution, which is the change in trait frequencies of a population over time. Okay? So we'll talk about some of those. In some books, like ours, they call it non-adaptive evolution. Adaptive evolution is natural selection, where the best adaptations or the good ones are the ones that survive and become more frequent in a population. Non-adaptive evolution would be a change in the allele frequency, but it does not lead them to be better adapted to the environment. Okay? Which sounds like that shouldn't happen, right? But I'll give you some examples of how that can happen. Okay? So the ones that we're going to talk about is the first one's known as assortative mating or sexual selection. There's just random mutations that might cause a major change, the process of gene flow, and then genetic drift. So we're going to talk about all four of these things, which are considered non-adaptive evolution. They don't necessarily, they're not driving towards the goal of things getting better. Natural selection isn't trying to make things better. That's just what happens over time, right? If there's competition, somebody's better at it, those survive and reproduce, right? There's not a goal for perfection. It's just good enough to survive and reproduce. But these seem to fall outside of that in some ways completely. So the most fun one that I think you guys can understand the most is called assortative mating. And it's usually when females choose males based on something other than their ability to survive and reproduce, right? If you think about, we talked about examples of birds. Lots of male birds have to build a good nest, and then they attract the females to the nest, and the females choose a male based on who made the best home for her. Well, that makes sense. If you have a really nice, safe nest, your eggs are going to survive better than some yahoo that built a crappy nest that the eggs are going to fall out of, or they built it, in a doghouse or something ridiculous, right? So she's choosing a male based on his ability to build a nice, safe home for the offspring. Well, in the case of the peacock, she chooses the male based on how enormous the feathers are and how spectacularly colored they are, okay? He could be a complete loser at getting food, right? Because those giant feathers have nothing to do with his ability to survive, get food, provide for a family. So she's picking something arbitrarily, okay? And sometimes, as in the case of those giant feathers, as far as surviving predators, which males would likely survive better? Ones with a 5-foot tail or a 3-foot tail? Yeah, the longer your tail, the slower the fox has to run to catch you, because your goddamn tail's 10 feet long, right? So it's non-adaptive. If she mates with that guy, her male offspring are going to be more likely to be eaten by predators. But she really loves that tail. She can't stop herself. Okay? So that's non-adaptive. So sexual selection is when females choose males for bad reasons. They used poor judgment, right? And they picked some, and it's generally the fancier, right? The fancier looking ones. So that's part of when we see out in nature, the females are generally more drab in color, right? They're brown. They're more likely to be camouflaged. They're the ones likely to be sitting on the eggs. They want to hide. They don't want to be flashy. The males end up being very flashy because that's the males the females pick, right? So the flashier the male, the more females mate with him, the flashier her male offspring will be, the more people, hopefully not people, birds, peahens will mate with those males, right? Those flashier, and over time, flashy, 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 flashy. If a male is born with a stubby tail, he's shunned, right? He doesn't get to mate with anyone. He doesn't have any offspring. His stumpy tail genes die with him, okay? So generally, sexual selection is bad for the survival of the males, but as long as they live to reproductive age and have sex with a whole bunch of females, it doesn't matter if they get eaten at the end of that season. They've already spread their traits, right? So if it's a trait that kills them before reproductive age, then it doesn't matter how flashy you are. If it actually causes you to be dead, then you're not going to pass that trait, right? So natural selection does also act on this, because if it got to the point where it was so ridiculous that none of those males could survive to reproductive age, right, then it couldn't get any more flashy than that, because they just wouldn't survive. Right? Not because it's not allowed, it's just they would be munched. They're not old enough to have sex before they're dead. Okay? So that's sexual selection. And so this is just a little chart showing that. So a whole lot of birds that get a little, like the males get a little flashier than the females. You can see if you look through this population, there's only a few of the males that get all the females, right? If you looked at 6, 7, and 8, they're just out, right? They didn't get to pass any traits at all, right? And then if you look at the phenotypes of the males that got all the action, those were the flashiest, or they had this wattle thing swells up into this big, huge, and they have the flashy tail and so forth. And apparently those chicks dig that. Right? And so then these guys don't get to pass their traits on, right? Because they don't have any offspring. These guys pass on their traits. Okay? And if their offspring are as successful as they were because they have this gigantic waddle, then they'll get more of the females, and then over time it becomes gigantic until it starts inhibiting their ability to survive, right? And then natural selection takes over because, again, if that starts getting in your way and you can't actually bend down to get food because this thing is in your way, then that guy starves before he can reproduce, okay? Okay. Oh, I have a little video of sexual selection that is riveting. I think you'll like it.
Douchebags all across the club. Ladies nice straight popping the bub. Clock her eyes right above his drink. Cheese stick style with a shooting wink. Snatch the ring from his hiding place. Flip the bird right in your face. Leave the bar to escape your glance. Cross the room, now it's time to dance. You sneak behind, don't mind I guess. Until your dong's on my cocktail glass. Cold as ice, yet you advance. And say you might jizz in your pants. And I puke in my mouth. Swallow it back, I need some room. Less I said I've got a groom. I turn away, you start to pout. And I puke in my mouth. You ruined my night, esophagus hurts. Take a hint, I'm not here to flirt. Round up the girls, it's time to bounce. Now I'll go brush my teeth. I
I'm 15 late for my yoga class. Kick through the door, now I'm up in that ass. Find a spot, last in the room. Focus, breathe, now it's time to own. That's when I noticed this dude behind me. Quite a big smile for my guy so tiny. Pit-stained t-shirt, drenched in sweat. O-face grin, bad as I get. He made a grunt and his body turned. Saw his shorts to his inner thigh perm and I puked in my mouth. Upside down so it's even worse. Son of Shiva with a curly curse. Help me please, I could use a towel cause I puked in my mouth. Why are there dudes up in yoga class? Nonchalant looking at my chest. Please stop staring when I'm on my knees. Plus bearded men shouldn't wear capris.
Last week, I was on a site. As I recall, it was a Facebook site. In my bed with a piece of toast. Checked my wall and saw your post and I
puked in my mouth. Soaking in the tub like a f***ing queen. Need to relax, need to feel the steam. A bubble comes up that reminds me of you and I puked in my mouth.
The next day, I put on jeans and
puked in my mouth. Open the fridge, a fruit rolled out. I puked in my mouth.
when I saw Tom Cruise in Valkyrie, I
Puked in my mouth. Drink kombucha. Puked in my mouth.
I just felt
Puked in my mouth.
Seriously, ladies, I think I'm gonna be sick.
I keep running my mouth every time you listen to me. And when you freak your game, it's like a train wreck to me. You're such a royal fish, I don't know why you said to me. Go get a rubber, you should go get all the sesame.
Cause I puked in my mouth. Puked in my mouth.
See? That's sexual selection. All right, any questions about that? There's lots of examples of sexual selection out there. If you type into Google, you'll find all kinds of interesting videos. Just be careful what comes up. And so so even though they're sexually selected traits, they still fall under natural selection at some point, right? To the point where whatever the thing that is attractive to the females, remember the blue-footed booby, right? His bright blue feet were what was attractive to the females. If somehow that becomes inhibitory to his ability to survive, to get enough food before reproductive age, then yeah, that's going to put a lid on, like those bright blue feet, probably pretty easy for predators to see, that sort of thing. Okay, so the next one is mutation. Now, pretty much all the genetic variation that we see on this planet is due to some sort of mutation at some point, right? The DNA sequences in our chromosomes determine what the organism looks like, what it acts like, right? It's the instructions for everything about that organism. And I think last time we talked a little bit about genes and alleles and traits. We talked about the earlobe trait, right? You either have the dangly kind of earlobes or the attached kind of earlobes, right? The shape is your phenotype. What gene you have, what allele you have is your genotype that determines that, right? So at some point in evolution from our common ape ancestor, right, there was a mutation in probably everybody had dangly ears. I don't know, I'd have to go look at a chimpanzee if they have dangly or attached. Chimpanzees are our closest living relative that exists on the planet right now. So at some point there was a mutation in the gene to give us the earlobe shape that changed that shape a little bit during development. Okay? That provided more than one allele. Now there's 2 alleles for earlobe shape. For other traits, there's lots more than 2 alleles. Okay, like for blood type, the sugars that are on our red blood cells, there's multiple alleles for that. Each individual one of us can only have 2 because we have pairs of chromosomes, but out there, there's more. At one point in evolution, everybody had the same blood type. Random mutations happen during replication when you're making more DNA and making more cells, right? Sometimes they create an allele that just changes something a little bit, but it's not really harmful. It's just different, right? Sometimes the mutations are bad and they kill you. Obviously, if you're dead, those aren't passed on. So we don't see the lethal mutations in any organisms because they cause death, right? We only see a neutral mutation, which either doesn't change anything or just changes phenotype slightly, right? Or mutations that change phenotype enough that it's advantageous, right? Pigments are just molecules that refract light in different ways, okay? So if you're wearing a green shirt, the pigment dye in that shirt just refracts green light, and that's why it looks green. So a small change in that pigment gene will change a little bit of the shape of that pigment. It will refract light a little bit different, and now green is turquoise, or green is yellow. Okay? So in nature, in birds, right, there's a little mutation in one of their pigments to put in their feathers, and now, or that stupid fish, remember those dumb fish, right, that had the orange spot or the blue spot, right? Orange can become blue relatively easily just by the way those pigment molecules work. Maybe one base pair change in DNA out of millions and millions and millions causes it to shape a little different. Now it's not refracting blue light, it's absorbing blue, and it's reflecting orange. Now he has an orange spot. If chicks dig it, if it's sexually selected for, he gets to have lots of offspring, they're likely to have that orange spot, blah, blah, blah. If it's not sexually selected for, if he's shunned, you're hideous, you don't have a blue spot, you have an orange spot, it dies away and we don't see it. Okay? Yeah? So his question is, can natural selection make mutation rate more common? No. The rate of mutation is usually determined by the ability of whatever organism to replicate their DNA appropriately. The only way that is different is in a case of like UV irradiation, which does cause DNA damage and mutations, right? So if we destroy our ozone, yeah, mutation rates will increase on this planet. But in general, mutations rates are sort of standard for the species. You might see more of them when there's surviving in an environmental change, right? A bunch of offspring are born, there's a few base pair changes here and there, and one got a change in something that does increase its survival in the new environment or decrease its survival in the new environment. It goes away or it gets passed on. Okay, but it doesn't, right? We can't make mutations happen to be better at getting chicks, right? If those fish, like they, you know, there's no like, oh, if I only had an orange spot, then, you know, we could speciate and do this. Mutations either happen or they don't, right? And they're either good or bad or neutral. The bad ones we generally don't see over time because the individual dies. The neutral ones we generally don't pay attention to. You don't even know they're there because they didn't change a phenotype. They didn't help somebody be better or worse at something. Only the mutations that provide genetic variation that's advantageous trait or provides genetic diversity that at some point, right, it's neutral, it doesn't matter, it's being passed along with everything else. You're not dying, it's not making you awesome in the population. Environment changes and now suddenly you're awesome because you had that mutation. Now you're the one that survives and gets to mate with all the females and pass on that trait. Right? So mutation happens all the time, and it's sort of the driving force for evolution over time. That's the only way we ever got any different, right? If we all started as that same single cell, if there was 0 mutations, we'd all still be that same single cell on this planet, right? There'd be one species on the planet, it would be that single cell from 3.5 billion years ago. But change does happen, right? The ones that were bad killed that cell. The cells that got a mutation that made it less able to survive in that environment died. Neutral, nothing. Better, maybe have more offspring, be able to divide and reproduce and blah, 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 blah. Okay? But we can also see mutation, a point mutation like in the stupid fish, that might happen randomly in one offspring that was born. Right? Mom lays eggs, they're fertilized, right? There's a mutation in a pigment gene. That guy has a little bit different color. Maybe it's just more vibrant blue. And so now all the female fish want that guy. And so now he fertilizes 90% of the female's eggs. Well, that trait suddenly, boom, in one generation, lots of offspring are going to have that vibrant blue dot, right? So that can happen quickly with that kind of mutation, okay? So and then the mutation happens, right? So it's non-adaptive, it's just random, and then whether it's sexually selected or naturally selected is whether it survives to reproduce. Right? So it can't, none of these things really stand alone. It's all sexual selection, or it's all just mutation, right? Natural selection, right, is always functioning out there. Sexual selection can be functioning out there, right, to act on this raw material for evolution is essentially what mutation is. Okay. And so the rate of mutation is generally very low, right? Organisms that have high rates of mutation are like viruses. Okay, viruses have very high rates of mutation because one viral particle can get into one of your cells and replicate itself and make 1 billion and just in one cell, which is ridiculous, right? So a high mutation rate is not going to cause extinction of that virus. So maybe 500 million die because the mutation was bad. There's still 500 million left, right? Even if 90% of the offspring of a virus has a mutation that's bad and causes it to be unable to move on, there's still so many there that either got neutral mutations or good ones, right? Makes that virus better at attaching to a cell and getting inside. Those types of organisms can afford to have a high mutation rate because they have a huge number of offspring. If you don't have a huge number of offspring, you can't have a high mutation rate without risking extinction at every reproductive event. Okay, so most organisms have a pretty low mutation rate. Okay, viruses and bacteria tend to have higher mutation rates. They have much faster life cycles, right? A viral particle life cycle can be a couple hours. Bacteria can be 20 minutes, right? They can make exponentially 100 million bacteria in 8 hours, right? So again, if half of those got bad mutations and died, you still have 50 million, okay? Okay. And then we talked about gene flow before, right? We were talking about speciation. If you have gene flow between two populations, right, that's having individuals in two different populations having sex with each other, spreading DNA back and forth, spreading their traits, right? That can change allele frequencies in a population. And not necessarily for the better of that population, right? One guy that just happened to, maybe he fell out of the sky. He was supposedly migrating with his population, and he was the worst flyer. He was the biggest wuss, and he falls into, the ground, into a nest, and he's hopping around. It happens to be all the women in that population, they just don't know any better, and they have sex with that guy, right? And they get stuck, their offspring get stuck with these alleles that are crappy flyers, right? They're not moving towards a better trait frequency. It was more random, right? Not natural selection, not sexual selection, right? Just gene flow between them, change the trait frequencies, put in some bad alleles into the population, right? By accident, just sort of happened. Okay? Or those are really good traits for the environment that guy was in. Right? He's super buff, he's well fed, he's super strong, right? He got blown by a hurricane into a new population or something, right? But he builds an awesome nest and chicks dig him, right? He looks like a good provider, but the traits that he's passing are good for the wet environment, and this is a dry environment. So those offspring aren't going to survive as well because of the gene flow, right? Something like that. Just remember, gene flow is having sex, organisms from one population to another, right? Mixing of DNA. Usually increases genetic diversity of a population and decreases the possibility of speciation, right? Speciation, they have to be reproductively isolated so they can get different over however, 1,000 years or whatever, so that they become two different species. So gene flow, if you're passing traits back and forth, those two populations are not going to get that different from each other because they're sharing DNA. So this is just a little example from our book showing how all these different populations are actually mixing of the alleles, so you can look at populations and study their DNA and determine which guys are mating with whom, right? And that it's unlikely for all these different populations to become different species because of gene flow. They are trading alleles back and forth, so they're not completely isolated. And a change in environment may cause species to move outside of their normal home range and cause more gene flow to happen, right, because of something different in the environment, right? Like a lack of food in your home range, so you're going to swim a little farther to get more food, and then, hey, I bump into the population next door, and, things happen when that happens. Okay, and so then the same idea from another book talked about blood types. Remember I talked about the blood types? You can be type A, right? Who's type A? Type A. You don't know your blood type? Oh, come on, people, work with me. Go to Red Cross and get typed. Type B, right? You can be type AB or you can be type O. Okay? At some point, we were all something. I don't know which one. But this is showing how the frequency of the B blood group, right? If we think about the history of people and where we lived, it wasn't until the last 100 or 150, 200 years or so that travel became very easy, right? If you were in a village somewhere, right, in the old Soviet Union or, Eastern Europe, it was unlikely that you were going to come down here to Spain because it would be like a 4-month walk, right? Or weeks and weeks on a horse, right? Those crazy pioneers in the United States that got in their covered wagons and went across the whole United States to get to California. Those were some tough people, right? Not easy to do that. You're just going to stay in your own little town and find somebody to get married to, right? Unless you're ostracized or you're a criminal and you get kicked out, or, somebody's trying to send you off to war and you have to swim a river to escape, okay? Right? So populations were more inbred, right? You stayed in your own little area. So if everybody in your town was type B, everybody's type B, okay? And then, horses are more, become more frequent. They start traveling and spreading those alleles, right? Traveling until they mix the gene flow, right? Mix up all those different alleles, right? The most common blood type is type O, right? And most of the Asian countries are type O. But now that everybody's moving around and having sex with everybody else, right, there are lots of individuals who are of Asian descent that do not have type O blood, right? Spreading of alleles, hybridization, hybrid vigor. Okay. Go! It's time again. Can't believe it. Let's see if we can find what I'm doing here. No. Let's see. Aha! There it is. Oh, this is my favorite. I told you this is going to come up over and over and over. Right? The definition of evolution. This will definitely be on the exam in some form. Okay, definitely. It will be on the first exam. It might be on the second exam. It'll definitely be on the final exam. Right? Remember we talked about populations. The criteria. So one of the criteria is change. Right? So we have that. All 4 of those have change. Change in trait frequency, change in allele frequency, change in trait characteristics, however you want to think about that. And then there were 2 other things that had to go along with it. Oh, I hope we get far enough for secret word of the day. Hurry up, people. We got to get to secret word of the day. Keep texting. Faster. Did you register? Yeah. And it just won't load today? Yeah. Is anybody else having issues? Top Hat loading issues? No. I had it last week. Yeah, you had trouble last week. Send it by text? Yeah, I already did. Okay, and then call their IT people, because I have no idea what that is. But they'll be able to pull your texts into your account. And just tell them you had some issue, and see if they'll give you the code. And then if it happens again, you can just do that. Oh my gosh, it's sleeping. All right, are we ready? All right, we're disabling, quote unquote. Oh my goodness, what's our report? Yay! Change in population! Populations! Ah! I'm going to keep saying it. I'm just going to keep saying it till you all get that right. Stomp my feet and have a little tantrum. Not species, because remember, what if the species is over the whole range of California? And there's environmental change in the Southern California only, and that population changes over time. The whole species didn't change, just that one population. Okay? And the individuals don't change. You're born with the DNA you got. You get what you get, and you don't get upset. Right? You learn to live in your own DNA. You can fight it, right? That's not to say you just go, oh, I got bad patient's DNA. I am allowed to be a jackass as much as I want. No, you realize that's a challenge for you. Okay, sorry, I think I'm talking to my kids. You guys are all like my kids. I just have a lot of them. Okay, my grown-up kids. Okay. That is enough of that for right now. Oh my goodness, we're going back. We're going in. Okay, and then the last one is called genetic drift. Genetic drift is historically difficult for students to grasp. I think it's just because the books do a crappy job of explaining it, so I'm going to try to do a better job. Genetic drift is the umbrella term for these 3 things, for the founder effect, a population bottleneck, and a chance differences in reproduction. All 3 of those are genetic drift, okay? It causes a change in trait frequencies of a population not based on having good adaptations. It's either based on a founder effect, a population bottleneck, or some chance thing that happens out in nature, okay? Not natural selection. Trait frequencies of the population change because of genetic drift. The genes or the alleles frequency drifts away, I think is why they call it that, right? It changes in some direction not because they're adaptive, for other reasons, okay? And the 3 reasons are by founder effect, population, chance differences. All of these are kind of random things that might happen that are outside of, it doesn't matter if you have a great adaptation. If there's some sort of founder effect in a population, you're going to get a different set of alleles that survive. So I'm going to give examples of these, and then I think it'll be easier to understand. But all 3 of those are genetic drift. So that's like its big umbrella term. The 3 ways genetic drift can happen is founder effect, bottleneck, or just some crazy chance in reproduction. Okay, so the founder effect is probably one of the easier ones. There's a billion examples out there. The book talks about, this chapter's all about our manatees. Oh, they're so cute, right? Remember, you have to have some variation in a population for this to matter. If these are all clones, right, exactly the same DNA, let's say we cloned a whole population of manatees from one, they all have the exact same DNA, then founder effect's not going to do anything. They're all exactly the same. This requires that there's big genetic diversity, and then randomly, right, a couple white guys and one gray guy decide to swim offshore. Okay, they're leaving these guys behind. None of the brown ones left. They said, you guys are idiots, go ahead. Okay, so 3 guys, or maybe 2 mating pairs, whatever, 3 kind of interesting, right? They land on this uninhabited island, and now they start having babies like crazy because there's tons of food and there's tons of places to be and there's no predators or whatever, right? And over time, that population went from 3 individuals to hundreds of individuals. These guys founded the population, like our founding fathers, right? They founded the population. There's no alleles for the brown trait. So none of this population is going to look brown. They're only going to be, whatever, whitish and gray, okay? The trait frequency of gray and white is much higher here, right? 50% are white, 50% are gray or something. Whereas over here, 33% are gray, 33% are white, and 33% are brown. Not because brown's a crappy color and predators eat it, or they suck at reproducing, or they can't get food, just because those guys did not go to that island, right? By chance or whatever. Maybe these guys didn't decide to go, they got blew over on a tsunami, right? A chance event. And they said, hey, this is a good place to live, we're going to set up camp here, okay? Not natural selection, not they were better adapted to this other island, and that's, right? None of the brown guys went over there. A few went to a new place and then populated it, okay? So the stupid finch video where a few stayed on the island and then 5 became 100, that's a founder population, okay? Does that make sense? So it's genetic drift because it's a change in trait frequencies by a chance event of only those 2 colors going over there and staying together and mating. Another really good example of the founder effect is the Amish population in the United States, right? They were kicked out of Germany or wherever because they were persecuted for their religion, right? They set up camp in the New World, and then they were persecuted for their religion. And they stuck together in a little small town in Pennsylvania, and I think it was 22 couples that came over, and now there's 1 million of them, right? 22 couples only, right? They do not intermingle with anybody else. If you're Amish, you only marry other Amish people and have Amish children, right? So any alleles that came with those 22 couples will be much more prevalent in that population because, as it turns out, if you live in a small town, you're going to marry your cousin because that's all that's available, okay? And then your cousin's cousin is also your cousin, who might also be your aunt, okay? So those traits are going to be spread through that population much more frequent than in the general population, right? And so one of the examples is having too many fingers, okay, right? We have a thumb and 4 fingers. Lots of them have a thumb and 5 fingers, okay? That's called polydactyly. Sometimes they have extra toes. So one person of those 22 had 6 digits on each hand. Okay? If that was in a normal population, right, would not become that much more prevalent. But if you're only allowed to intermingle with that small group, right, now lots of the Amish have these extra digits because they're only allowed to intermingle. Okay? So that's a founder effect. 22 couples, right, stay together now, however big the Amish population is, because they don't interbreed at all. Okay, so there's lots of interesting genetics in any inbred population, right? Lots of populations, and not all of them are marrying cousins when I say inbred, right? But especially if you're required to marry certain individuals based on your religion, right, then that decreases your gene pool, right? Because you can't just go marry anybody, right? So lots of Jewish populations, right, carry lots of interesting alleles that are much more frequent than the random population because it was a religion where, right, you stuck together and you mostly married, at least historically, within your religion. And so there's lots of alleles that are much higher frequency in people of Jewish descent than, your generic white person. Okay? And lots of island communities and that sort of thing have much higher trait frequencies of certain things because of the founder effect, because of genetic drift. Not because it makes them better at surviving, right? They're not better farmers because they have an extra finger, right? Better at milking cows or something, right? It's just because of the founder effect that it exists in that population, right? It's obviously not selected against, right? If it was selected against, it would have disappeared. That one woman with the 6 fingers, nobody'd have sex with her, right? If she would, so she can't pass that and done, right? Or she got lucky or whatever, and her offspring were then ostracized because they had 6 fingers, then it goes away if they don't ever reproduce, right? So if it's not selected against and it's just not selected for, right, based on this founder. So again, the founder effect, then natural selection can affect it, or sexual selection can affect it, but the actual alleles that show up there are just those 22 people have, whatever DNA they happen to have is what everybody in that new population has. Yeah?
So this falls under evolution, the genetic effect?
Yeah, so all of this stuff is still evolution. It's just not evolution by natural selection, right? So it would be non-adaptive evolution, a genetic drift causing a change in trait frequencies in a population over time.
So if there wasn't like the extra finger or anything like that, then it wouldn't be.
If they didn't, right, so that's a great question. So our question is, what if the Amish, the 22 people were generic, right, and they had nothing interesting or different? Would that be evolution over time? No, not if they had the same allele frequency or trait frequencies as the normal people, I shouldn't say normal, the other people that colonized the United States and Pennsylvania that were living nearby, right? Evolution has to be a change in trait frequencies. So the Amish, I don't know, having an extra digit in the everyday population is, 0.001%, so really low. Whereas in the Amish, it's 10% of the population, right? So their frequency of having that extra finger is way higher than the populations of human beings, the same species, around them.
But would it still be considered a genetic drift?
Yes, because it's a change in trait frequencies that wasn't by natural selection, right? Natural selection would be, we have somebody with 6 fingers, that person's a much better farmer, can grow more food, and so they're much more robust, they have more kids, right? They had 12 kids and the other families only had 4, and then all those 12 kids were super strong and had big farms and made a lot of food and had wives that had 12 kids, and over time that extra digit actually adapted them better to the environment.
But if the extra digit was not there, would it be considered a genetic drift? Because they still did drift from one place to another, but there's not the extra.
So genetic drift is not the moving of the individuals to a new place. It's their genes, their genetic components in their DNA drifting away from what everybody else in that area's DNA looked like. So it's not the process, I don't like the term either, I'm with you. It's not that these guys drifted over here physically. It's that the trait frequencies drift away from 33% to 50-50, right? Or a better example would be, what if only the white guys got blown over there? Right? There's a tsunami, and just randomly, 4 of these white ones got caught in the wave and got washed over here. Right? And then they set up camp, woo, woo, woo. All of the 100% would be white. This entire population would only have the white allele. 100%. That's a change in frequency, huge change, from 33% in the original population to 100% in the new population. Right? That's evolution happening by genetic drift, the founder effect of genetic drift. Not because white is better over here, right? It's just as likely as if only gray ones were tossed over here that they'd survive and this would all be gray. Or only brown ones happened by chance to get tossed over here, then these would only be brown. Okay? Does that make sense? And it's evolution. Evolution is anything that's a change in trait frequencies of a population over time by any of these mechanisms. Yeah? Yes, and so her question is, would that also be a mutation? Yes, there was a mutation at some point in the history of that woman that had the 6 fingers, or whoever the first individual that had a 6th finger, right? And it doesn't have to be a major change. Lots of phenotypes can look very different, and the actual DNA change is very small, right? And that'd be something during development, right? We start off with a little limb bud, right? And we look like a chicken or a fish, or we all kind of look the same, and it just kind of looks like this. And then there's signals to actually grow the limbs, okay, in the specific places. If the genes are turned on a little bit off or a little bit wrong, you'll grow another digit, right? You can do this in Drosophila. If you turn on the gene to make their legs here, they'll grow a leg out of their forehead, okay? It could be like a one single base pair mutation. Not a big deal genetically, but phenotypically what you see might turn out to be something really big, right? So some random mutation caused people to have an extra digit. It didn't harm them, and it didn't help them, and so it stuck around, right? And so it exists because, right, whatever, you got an extra finger, big deal, okay? If it was something like extra toes way back when, and it allowed those individuals to run faster or be more balanced, catch more woolly mammoths, run away faster from saber-toothed tigers, we'd all have 6 toes on every foot, because that's what would have survived to reproduce better and would have increased in populations, right? It didn't. So most of us have 5 toes. Occasionally somebody has 6. Whatever, right? Wasn't selected for or against, right? So it's mutation and then founder effect for the Amish, right? That change that trait frequency that causes evolution over time. That make sense? So none of these really can stand alone, but if I'm specifically asking about the founder effect, it's when a very few individuals from original population set up a new population, only the traits that they have end up in the new population. Because that's all they have. They can't spread the brown gene, they don't have it, right? Okay. Bottlenecks are very similar, okay? In some books, they treat a bottleneck like a founder effect. A bottleneck specifically is when you have a population and suddenly you have a crash in numbers, some starvation event, a major change in the environment, something that happens that takes a population of thousands down to, teens or 50s, much smaller, right? 1 million to 50. Right? And then those guys bounce back to survive and reproduce, and so you go back up to hundreds or thousands. But it just, whoever happened to be left over in that big event are the ones that, those alleles that end up in that new population. Okay? Generally not going anywhere. So a good example would be cheetahs in Africa. The cheetah population was decimated, I don't even know when they think it was. A long time ago, they think it might have been some sort of virus. From, hundreds and thousands of cheetahs down to only several mating pairs. Okay? Those several mating pairs that survived have repopulated all the cheetahs in Africa now. Right? There's not a lot of them, but there's hundreds and hundreds. Okay? Their DNA is so similar to each other that in order to there's very little genetic diversity. They worry if a new virus comes out or some major environmental change, the cheetahs are going to go extinct because they have very little genetic diversity to bounce back, to have anybody to be adapted to the new environment. Okay? We know from the fossil record there used to be cajillions of cheetahs, right? At some point, very, very few. Now, a stable population again. But all their DNA, all their alleles were from several mating pairs. Okay? That's a bottleneck. Go from big, squeeze down, and then go big again. Okay? But not moving to a new location. They're in Africa, right? Most of them starved, and then they repopulated Africa. Founder effect is, right, if they were in Africa and then a few took a boat to Madagascar, right, and set up camp there. Right? So founder effect is a couple individuals moving away from the population and then repopulating. Bottleneck is the whole population crashes and then comes back. Right? Again, whatever alleles are left in those few that survived will end up being in that population. And that might be also acted on by natural selection because the ones that survived might be because they were the best able to store fat and didn't starve. Right? It could be random chance if there was some fire and but again, none of them really stand too much on their own. Yeah.
Does the founder effect have to be by natural selection? Like, for example, let's say people took a few cheetahs from one place to another and then they populated. Would that still be a founder effect?
Yeah, founder effect does not have to be under natural selection. Okay? It can be chance, exactly. Like people took a few cheetahs and put them on another island, and those two mating pairs now grew to a population of 100. They're all very similar because they essentially had all the same parents, or one mating pair, right? And animals don't care if it's their son or daughter or sister or brother or whatever, right? And so then they're just mating with each other, and their allele frequencies are just going to be what they showed up with compared to the other population. That's exactly a founder effect. Exactly. So his question was, the cheetahs that survived, if it was a virus that killed them off, would they be have a better immune system, better able to survive a new virus? Theoretically, yes, if it's the same class of virus. Okay? Like, if you've had the flu this year, influenza, the real flu, where you have the high fever and you feel like crap for a week or whatever, then yeah, you're less likely to get any kind of flu than somebody who didn't get the flu shot and didn't have the flu. But you're just as likely to get strep throat as somebody else, or chicken pox, unless you've been vaccinated, right? So it doesn't always mean they just have a much better immune system. It's likely, though, that if you really have a shitty immune system and a virus comes through, you're dead, right? You're not going to pass that on. Exactly. Okay. And then this is just a chance event. Most of these are small populations. Like, what if there's only one, very few in the population have the red coloring, right? It's just a variant. Doesn't make them better, doesn't make them worse, it just exists. And what if randomly that one falls off the cliff, right? Or a predator grabs it, not because it's brighter red, just because that's the one it grabbed. And now that variant's gone, so the population's, there's no more red alleles, so there's going to be no red guys there. Right? So that would be a drift in trait frequencies, if the red guys all fell through the hole when there's an earthquake. Not because they were red, but just they had bad luck. Okay, so chance events, things that aren't by natural selection or something that made you better at surviving and reproducing, like shit happens, right? That's genetic drift. Okay? Then later can be acted on by all kinds of other stuff, or could have started because of a mutation or something like that. But that actual process, right, is genetic drift. Okay. So again, just the big umbrella is called genetic drift because it's a change in allele frequencies, either by founder effect, bottleneck, or some crazy chance event that happens. Right? Usually these affect small populations, right? Because if there's 33% of each color and there's 1 million of that, if 2 or 3 blow away, it's not going to make that big of a deal, right? Or a bottleneck happens and you go down from 18 billion to, 180 million. That's still a huge population with lots of ability to have genetic variation. So genetic drift generally affects small populations much more severely than a giant population. Can happen to any, but small populations, you can see the changes much better. Okay. And so these populations are at a higher risk of extinction or having something bad happen to it because, again, a reduction in genetic diversity means there's not as many different traits or different adaptations in that population. If there's a change in the environment, and nobody's good at surviving, everybody dies, right? Then you just go extinct. So genetic diversity is important, okay? And so for things like cheetahs, which there's lots of efforts to save, they're trying to be protected, even though they're still being hunted and, it's a problem. Breeding programs are taking cheetahs and doing DNA sequencing and then breeding together cheetahs that are the most different from each other, so that the offspring have the maximum amount of genetic variability as possible out there. Rather than just randomly taking zoo cheetahs and putting them together and hoping for babies, they're going through and trying to find the ones that are the most different from each other and breeding those together. Oh my gosh, we're doing this again? It's like Top Hat Day. What time is it? Oh man, we're not gonna get the secret word of the day. I'm just gonna have to say kinky. All right, you guys are the best. All right. Okay. Genetic drift is the umbrella term for several forces that act outside of natural and sexual selection. One of the definitions below is not correct. Choose the wrong definition. Which one is not true? We're going to get 100% on this, right, guys? You're going to see me have a little tantrum. Okay, don't put the wrong answer just to see a tantrum. Oh. Oh, we have 2 more minutes. Where are you going? Get back here. Here he comes. No, he's not coming back. He's like, I'm out of here. What's wrong with her? She's crazy. Come on, come on, come on. Fire it in there, people. Oh, there's only 1 more minute. Oh, somebody just took theirs back. Failed text message. All right, I'm reporting it. Let's check it out. Ready? No! Okay, good. Change your answers, people. All right. This is the definition of sexual selection, right? Whatever sexier is to whatever organism, whether you have a giant tail or you're a good dancer, whatever. So those 2 are true. This one is not true. All right, guys, I'll see you Thursday. Oh my God, I didn't get through anything today.